So I call my story, Does Snake Oil Really Work? The snake oil salesman is the image that I have in mind. And I kind of have a skeptical view of most claims to reality. My total knowledge about snake oil salesmen comes from watching Western movies and TV as a child. This is his product. He sells snake oil. And this is his office. Pretty elegant sometimes. And this is his claim. Claim cures everything. Now, everybody's got a little bit of variation in that. In reality, his product probably was mostly alcohol with some herbal additives. His authority? Well, he's got his opinion, and he's very persuasive, and he's got a special sale today, but don't miss it if you hesitate. Did his elixir do any of what he claimed? Probably yes and no. Curing everything is kind of a hyperbole, but it may have helped some ailments. The evidence is that people were looking for relief and hope, and some probably actually got relief. Now, I have a friend, and he was telling me that his father, who 100 years ago was age 14, got a job driving for an old man around a route to sell his elixir, he didn't call it snake oil probably, to some older ladies in the community. They must have either liked the alcohol or felt like they were getting some benefit from it. My skepticism relates to whether the snake oil itself has any curative agency. So I started calling explanations that were offered without an explicit scientific basis snake oil. A person's judgment may be offered honestly, but it may or may not be credible. I resist snake oil explanations. A little bit of my journey. I had sciatic pain. That's where your leg hurts all the way from your back down to your foot. An x-ray revealed a bulging disc. The doc said surgery may be helpful or not. I asked, and he gave me a research paper on back pain results, which revealed that most people were back to normal in 2 years or less, whether they had only conservative care, meaning they didn't do any poking, didn't take any medication, or a lot of medication. But with surgery, they got relief a little bit sooner, maybe 6 months. I didn't choose surgery, but I did recover. And then later, I observed a subtle skin numbness in my lower legs, and the doc stated that the strength of one leg was less than the other. He predicted that numbness and strength deficit would remain. I still have the numbness, but the strength difference is minimal. A couple of years prior to that, I had begun to experience what I call old people's leg problem. It means having increasing difficulty getting up out of a chair or from the ground. One day, I thought my career was over when I had great difficulty getting up from the ground. I asked my doc, he said, well, you might go to the gym. That might be beneficial. The gym people listened to my story and suggested a number of machines to use. Yeah, the gym workout was beneficial aerobically and generally strength-wise, but I observed that pains during the exercise were not in the primary muscles involved in each machine, which seemed inconsistent to me. I realized I walked slower and concluded it was the result of that feeling in my legs. Did that sensation mean walking would damage something in my legs? Suppose I walked faster. Would that do more damage? Easy to test. So I walked faster, and the leg sensation decreased. That's interesting, and is inconsistent with the expectation that the pain was due to the tissue damage. Signals are a common element of engineering. I told you I was an engineer, and I had heard descriptions that some nerves signal pain and others activate muscle movement. But I never heard of anyone suggest that signals could malfunction, except one of Moseley's painful yarns. Sensor malfunction is expected in engineering, but not really considered to be likely in medicine. At least that was my observation and experience. My leg muscles moved as intended and less pain occurred. Then the motor signal seemed to block the motor and I couldn't move any further. Had a lot of questions, but few answers, which took me beyond snake oil. The physical therapist friend told me about Moseley's Explain Pain Supercharged book. There it is, kind of weird art decoration on it. He had actually written the book for therapists so that they could understand what he was describing in that last video. And the first half explained the insights from neuroscience research with citations of research papers. The second half were suggestions for therapists' practices, to help people in the journey that he's described here. I read the first half and some of the cited papers. They convinced me the insights had a credible basis and weren't snake oil. After that, I understood that my pain experience is constructed in my brain as a protective mechanism anchored partly in a fear of possible injury from falling. The absence of pain under anesthesia or the phantom limb pain were clear evidence to me that pain is constructed in the brain. Mosley's book, Painful Yarns, has a tale in it, a fellow that had a phantom limb. Anyway, he's on this ride with the guy, and at one point he's in agony. He says, "Hand me my leg and push on that circle spot there." And the pain stops. He says, "It only works if I can see it." The challenge is, what can I do to influence pain when my brain makes a wrong conclusion about the threat of injury? My brain makes other mistakes. So a threat mistake would certainly be possible. Then I found a book last fall called The Way Out, in which this fellow says it is actually a neuroplastic mistake, a brain mistake, neuroplastic meaning it can change. Your brain can relearn it. So here's some of my experiences and some of the pains that I have. Probably the most irritating is when I'm going up and down the stairs. Well, there's my stairs. There's another view of the stairs. But here's wow, that's the most threatening set of stairs that I normally find myself going up and down. That's the boiler room in our church. But I wouldn't really be willing to go down a set of stairs without a handrail. That's the perceived threat part of it. Several years ago, my leg pains were more troublesome. They've improved since then, and I wondered if I would eventually be unable to work at all on the uneven terrain in the backyard. That's what the backyard looks like. There's another one. Yeah, the terrain is really irregular. The problem seems to be influenced by a decline in various sensations my brain depends on to balance my center of gravity as I age. There's research that suggests that our nervous systems and the sensors do lose some sensitivity as we age, but I also wonder if my brain gradually loses confidence in those sensors, which may be a larger effect. The change in balance probably is a combination of the two effects. So I decided I didn't want to lose the ability to work in the backyard and began practicing what I call intentional normalcy. That is my term for the practice of observing my current body movements and recalling how I moved in the past and watching normal movements of other people when I couldn't easily recall them myself because I forgot them. And then intentionally repeating these normal movements that had been lost because of the presence of pain. For example, instead of shuffling along, and I found myself doing that at times, I practiced lifting my foot and swinging that lower leg forward. Lifting my feet reduced the likelihood of an unexpected disturbance in the normal movement, like catching my foot on a small irregularity. This practice works for me, and I'm not suggesting you should do it, but only observe that I decided the use of a cane would inhibit normal movements, so I chose not to use one. Another example, I realized my leg pains had destroyed normal movement pattern that we learn and use in everyday activities. Our center of gravity when we move is located about where our belly button is. The normal movements keep the belly button dynamically centered between our feet. That's what keeps us from falling over. When we sit, our belly button is not near our feet. When we've forgotten our normal movement pattern because of the leg pains, the motor signal to the muscles has been the tendency to use hands and arms to lift because of the leg pain, and that eliminates the normal movement. Watch people the next time when they're getting out of a chair, they don't struggle to get out, and you'll see that their initial motion is to pitch their torso forward just the right amount so that the belly button is dynamically carried to the zone of stability over their feet. So a lot of different causes. Now, the snake oil business was about claims of correlation and cause. Now, correlation means I took that and I felt better. That does not necessarily mean that it really changed the effect of what was happening. So the effect between aging and sensory decline seems to occur, but correlation is not sufficient to establish a causal relationship. However, the threshold when a sensor fires may have also been a brain adjustment. If some users of snake oil report improvement of a symptom, that doesn't mean that the oil made the difference. The major factor probably is something other than the oil. Two speakers at the 2022 Oregon Pain Summit in September suggested a plausible answer for me. Jonathan Bedlinski showed strong correlation between the number of adverse child experiences. These are the 10 that they talked about, things that can happen to you when you're in childhood, and the relationship with disease in later life. And people that had 4 or more of these, you can see in there, were twice as likely, 4 times as likely to have some diseases later in life. Interesting correlation, but that's not sufficient to conclude that they actually caused those outcomes. However, then he went on to anchor the research and conclude that they did in fact cause those outcomes. And he did that by describing something about brain development. He described 3 decision centers in the brain: the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the cortex. The amygdala just is really fast. It makes a decision on whether you should run or fight. The hippocampus is more related to based on memories. Have we been here before? Is this something similar to what we've experienced or had? And the cortex is where we decide, would this be something we should choose to do for whatever rationale there is? And so those are the 3. And what they found was that people who had a lot of those adverse childhood experiences, that they primarily responded through this and reinforced this response from the outward senses to the amygdala, which is that real quick response brain. And because these other 2 didn't use well, the number of cells that occurs throughout life, they change, the brain cells change in number significantly, particularly in childhood, that these parts of their brains actually didn't grow in the normal fashion. And that seems to be a functioning cause, that they were making poor choices because they didn't have these other capabilities. All of their memories said everything is a threat. And so they made poor choices, had more disease and shorter lifespan. I'm not aware of any causal factors associated with snake oil. Then another speaker at the Pain Summit was Matthew Burke, and he offered a promising introduction to a new area that probably will reveal the causal situation for snake oil benefits, as well as other observed benefits that are commonly assigned to medications or procedures. He described the frontiers and research in the influence of placebo. Those are the sugar pills that they use in a control group. They call it a blind study. They give half the group whatever the medicine is and half the group these placebo sugar pills, and then they see what difference there is. And frequently, the group that gets the placebos as large or nearly as large a response as the people that got whatever the medication was. Placebos have gotten a lot of recent research insights, and the potential end conclusion might be that the placebo effect is real and the brain is ultimately in control of all the responses. But current insight really doesn't support that conclusion yet. Now, here's a figure that Burke produced. This is interesting. The test here was people that have asthma have difficulty breathing, and they use an inhaler that has something I think called albuterol. And they gave 3 different placebos here, and they measured the air that a person was actually breathing. And the placebos didn't really have any effect on improving the air, the exchange for the person that had asthma, but the albuterol did. Interesting. The next thing, just the opposite. Here is the actual albuterol, but here is a placebo, and here is a scam acupuncture. This one is nothing. And the difference here is that the question wasn't how much did the actual air movement improve, but how much did the person think it improved? Very interesting. There's also something called the nocebo, which is the first time I heard of that. And those are side effects of placebos. Interesting. My belief is that snake oil benefit does not come from the oil, but is constructed in the brain when favorable circumstances surround the prescription and administration of the oil. So I believe snake oil works sometimes, not because of the claims that the oil or the elixir has special ingredients, but because the circumstances are favorable to changing the user's beliefs. I see the situation to be consistent with pain science insights, and specifically with Dr. Cucaro's pain triangle analogy, which is here. And he describes 3 dimensions of pain that are constructed. There's usually some sensation involved, got lots of that most of the time. The emotion is what that second part of the brain that has your memories and says, have we been here before? Should we be afraid of this or not? And then the cognition, that's what do you think about now? Is this something that I think is important right now for whatever reason? So I found these all useful and seemed to add the perceived protection. I realized that the alternatives, I really believe everything that Mosley described. And that's the end of my talk.